I grew up playing the NES and Sega Genesis, but by the time I was old enough to actually play them, they were both quickly becoming old news. The N64 was the first console I ever got that was brand new technology, and it wasn't long before my playtime on that console rivaled that of my Game Boy. I, like many other kids though, didn't have a whole lot of games. They're very expensive, so you pretty much end up only getting new games on holidays and birthdays. Because of this, you better have made a wise decision when asking for specific ones. And back then, finding out which games were good or bad was pretty hard. You couldn't just go on YouTube and look up a review. You just had to look at these biased magazines. It was very difficult. There was pretty much no way to be sure whether or not a game was quality unless like a friend of yours told you. I had a good handful of N64 games as a kid, and not all of them were stellar. But you make do with what you have, and I ended up really liking at least most of them, and to this day I still have an affinity for them, even if they weren't all good. So let's talk about a few games that may not be good, but some part of me unapologetically likes them nonetheless. Quick disclaimer, I'm getting over being sick, so if I sound like I'm getting over being sick, it's 'cause I'm getting over being sick. I'm sorry. So when I was a kid, I really liked Earthworm Jim. I liked the games, I liked the show, and after the advent of 3D console games based on IPs that up until then were 2D, I was pretty excited when I saw that Earthworm Jim had its own 3D adventure on the N64. And then I played it. You know what? I didn't hate it. But once I got up to the first boss, Psychro, I wanted to rip my hair out. I thought going back as an adult, I would see something I didn't as a kid and have a much easier time, but no, this boss is horrifically cheap. That being said, as I've grown, my dexterity has now increased, and I was finally able to beat him. I've gotta say, when I was a kid, I did like exploring the levels, the ones I could access anyway, and now going back as an adult, while this game is super flawed, Earthworm Jim moves way too slow, the camera is one of the worst I've ever seen, and the amount of enemies is relentless, I do not think this game is a steaming hot pile of garbage like everyone else seems to. I'll be the first to say a game is trash if I really believe it is, but at the same time, I'll be the first to come to its defense if I feel like its criticisms are harsh or unjust. Now don't get me wrong, this isn't exactly what I'd call a good game, but to say it has no redeeming qualities or can't be enjoyed is a bit off the mark in my opinion. To give a quick rundown, this is just a very middle-of-the-road 3D platformer with a hub, different worlds, bosses, a main collectible, and a smaller but more abundant collectible. It's not remarkable, but it's also not totally broken either. The premise of the game is that Earthworm Jim is basically in a hospital bed in a coma, and the entire game takes place inside Jim's head as you explore the different parts of his mind collecting his marbles because he lost them. The object of the game is to collect all of his marbles to ultimately wake him up. Getting more marbles, though, requires you to enter new stages, and to open new stages, you need to collect golden udders. They're stars. It's kind of a neat concept, and in the game's main hub, there's even a window where you can see outside of Jim's actual eyes, showing him being rushed about the hallways of a hospital. Like, they added stuff like that. Someone clearly cared when they were making this game. As frustrated as I got with this game as a kid, I did find myself going back to it every once in a while because I did actually find some charm in it. Maybe it's nostalgia talking, but when going back and playing it now, I can't say I really want to sit down and complete it, but I definitely didn't hate it, and I don't think if I actually finished it, I'd have any regrets. Also, I've got to say, the cleaver weapon, beheading the bovine enemies, is equal parts jarring and satisfying. I've been a huge fan of South Park since it first aired, which, if you do the math correctly, is since before I probably should have been watching it. Oops. If you were around when the show first aired, its popularity was pretty unavoidable, like Pokemon in the 90s levels of unavoidable, and somehow just as controversial. My mom would constantly tell me I wasn't allowed to watch it, but pretty much everyone else at school did, and for better or for worse, eventually my mom couldn't do much about me being exposed to it. A little bit of time rolls by, and a South Park game is released for the console I was currently obsessed with, along with a PS1 release as well. Sign me right up. I'm gonna be fully transparent right now. I loved this game. Sure, I completely sucked at it, and now upon playing it as an adult, I can say that wasn't entirely my fault, but with the help of built-in cheat codes, I saw every level of this game multiple times. I know the creators of the show, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, are on record saying this game is terrible and they personally hate it, but as a kid, there was nothing cooler to me than being able to explore South Park itself on foot. The game is a first-person shooter based in the universe of South Park and features a lot of memorable locales seen in the show. I will say, playing it now, the game is a lot less fun than it used to be, but there is still some degree of stupid charm to it. I will also say there is no excuse for the excessive use of turkey enemies, and hearing them incessantly gobble into my eardrum is enough to make me want to drive a pencil into my ear canal. Still though, this game, despite how repetitive it can be and its over-reliance on irrelevant references and phrases heard in the show, still has a few things going for it that make it something that at the very least counts for something more than just a cash grab. I mean, come on, Terrence and Phillip are grenades and proximity mines, only with farts. That's genius. Each Each weapon has two different modes, one which fires fast, and the other which has longer lag time in terms of rate of fire, but also deals more damage. Snowball? Piss Snowball. I don't know, man. Everyone knows this game is janky and repetitive and suffers from some of the worst draw distance fog of any N64 game, but at the time, for fans of the show, this was pretty cool to be able to experience. Is this what I'd call a good game? No, not at all. But is it the worst piece of crap to ever exist in the N64's library? No. At its worst, it's a repetitive, kind of frustrating, corny license game based on a popular IP. At its best, though, it's an interactive, first-person look into a previously unexplorable 2D world. It's a bad game, but it's a pretty neat bad game, at least for its time. I have yet to meet a person that has anything good to say about Clayfighter 63 1/3. I got this game when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, not knowing at all that this was an already established franchise, but the game didn't really do anything to convey that it was a sequel, especially considering the amount of games that at the time used 64 in the title, to which this game thought it would be cute to parody. I'm gonna be honest, I had no idea this game was disliked until I got older and heard everyone talk about how terrible it is. The N64 entry is the first and only game I ever played in the series, and I always liked it. This is one of the N64 games that I sank hours and hours into as a kid. As I said earlier, I loved Earthworm Jim, so to see him as a playable fighter in this game just further sold it for me. I love the aesthetic, I love the music, and I love the creepy, weird, and quirky mood of the whole thing. This is one of the few games where I played it as a kid but never once thought anything about it was bad. Sure, it's not the greatest fighting game mechanically, but I think as a standalone experience, its campaign is pretty fun, and the game has a good amount of content, including 3 unlockable fighters, which happens to include Boogerman. Earthworm Jim was insane enough, but adding Boogerman to the mix just further cemented my stupid 9-year-old brain's love for this game. I don't really think that a fighting game really needs to be great mechanically to be fun as just a one-player campaign experience. Not that I think it's okay to control badly, but I don't think it needs to be, like, tournament viable. A lot of my gaming time as a kid was spent alone. Sure, I had some friends whose houses I went to sometimes, but the majority of the hours I spent gaming were solo. Between the roster of characters all having unique ending stories, the hidden characters, varied stages, secret in-game cheat codes, and just all-around goofiness, this game gave me hours and hours of fun and I never once questioned it. I get that mechanically, as a fighting game, it's not the best. I think saying that would be an understatement. But I think as a game, just a game in and of itself, not comparing it to other competitive fighters at the time, it's a pretty fun time. I'm gonna bet this part probably wouldn't be politically okay today, though. An updated version of this game also happens to be one of the most expensive cartridges to own on the N64. For those unaware, they re-released the game as Clayfighter Sculptor's Cut, available only as a rental exclusively at Blockbuster. They added a bunch of stuff, removed a bunch of stuff, and apparently made it worse despite adding 4 new characters. Unfortunately, it was also the last game in the series to be released, as a remake was planned for WiiWare and DSiWare, but ended up getting cancelled. As far as a sequel, though, there hasn't been word of anything. But I don't know, with all these reboots coming out, maybe, who knows. I will defend Yoshi's Story to the death. I adore this game. Yoshi's Story was the first N64 game I ever owned and also the first Yoshi game I ever played. I had previously seen a friend of mine playing Yoshi's Island but never got a chance to try it myself, and once I played Yoshi's Story, I was hooked on Yoshi games, and up until Woolly World came out, this was my favorite Yoshi game of all time. Blasphemy, I know. After playing a lot of the other games in the series, I can definitely see why this one is the black sheep, but I never thought this was a bad game and I still don't. It's different. Very different, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. In typical Yoshi games, they play out as a normal platformer. Traverse a stage, make it to the goal, all while avoiding enemies and grabbing collectibles. In this game, however, it's a lot more about exploration, and the only way to finish a stage is to eat enough fruit, which are scattered around each of the stages. Each of the game's worlds are different pages in a pop-up book, all which house multiple stages you can choose from, and all vary wildly in design. Different stages become accessible to you depending on which route you choose to take, so to fully complete this game, you'll have to play through the game multiple times, kind of like how Star Fox 64 is set up. There's a lot to explore here, and there's even 2 secret Yoshis, a black one and a white one, which not only can eat the normally damaging hot peppers for health, but have a more damaging shot when they fire eggs. In Yoshi's Story, though, when you die, you lose one of your Yoshis, so the different colors of Yoshi essentially act as the game's life system. That being said, if you die as one of your special Yoshis, you lose them for the rest of the game. That is, unless you can find another hidden character in this game, the White Shy Guy. Finding and finishing a stage with a White Shy Guy makes him selectable from the Yoshi selection screen, and doing so makes him save one of your previously captured Yoshis. That basically explains it all. Like pretty much all other Yoshi games, Yoshi's Story is filled with clever mechanics, original enemies, and it's just straight up exploding with charm, and it's so cheerful that I honestly can't understand how anyone can hate this game. I understand that people have wildly differing opinions, but I don't think this game should be discredited for what I think it did right, and I can see a lot of its influence in Yoshi games even now, especially in something like Woolly World or Crafted World. Both of those games remind me a lot more of Story than Island, but maybe it's just me. Anyway, these are 4 games that I played obsessively as a kid and still to this day have a soft spot for, even though they might not be what you'd consider good. Except Yoshi's Story. I'm sorry, that's a good game. Don't at me. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, maybe check out one of the other videos I have right there on the screen. If you want to see more, click that subscribe button and now also the bell for notifications when I release new videos, since apparently subscribing doesn't always show you that. And if you want to help me afford to feed myself, my Patreon link is right there too.